Hello, everyone. We're just waiting for people to come rolling in. We'll give them a couple more minutes and we will get started. As a reminder, this is going to be a bit more of a meeting workshop, a bit more of a discussion. So whoever does feel comfortable, I invite you to turn your camera on. There's no pressure though. Just wanted to put it out there. Let's give everyone else maybe 2 more minutes before we get started. Hi, Lily. Nice to put a face to the name. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well, thank you. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Okay, a couple more minutes here. Hope everyone is enjoying their Tuesday evening coming off of the long weekend. So as people are slowly rolling in, just reiterate that we're going to be talking about postpartum body image and health today, a topic that I am super passionate about and very excited to dive a bit deeper into. I'll give everyone just 1 more minute and then we will get the ball rolling.
Hey,
Hi there, how are you?
doing great. And yourself?
Very good, thank you. I see your little one's making an appearance today. Oh, lovely.
Yes.
Nice. Oh, hello.
Hi.
So sweet. Love to have our little ones attend.
We have there's a little one here too, but just not.
Ah, congratulations.
Congratulations. Okay. All right, we will slowly go ahead and get started. So again, welcome to a webinar that I am very excited to be hosting here today. We are going to be diving into postpartum body image and health, hosted by Hatch and myself, Amanda. And we're going to be really diving into a lot of the unrealistic expectations that are unfortunately placed on the postpartum body, and then discuss some ways that we can begin to really cultivate positive body image and just care for our body and health in this postpartum period. So a little bit about our agenda today. So we're going to do a little bit of a welcome, a little bit of introduction, some reflections to get us started. And then we're going to dive a bit deeper into the context, so really laying the groundwork around prenatal weight gain, different expectations around postpartum bodies, and why this topic is so important to tackle. From there, we'll dive a bit deeper into postpartum body image and its impact. This is going to be the bulk of our work today. And then from there, kind of shift gears to really talk about how we can cultivate that positive body image, that positive self-talk that is so important during this time. And then we'll close with some final reflections and a closing discussion. Again, any questions along the way, you can either drop them in the chat box or Q&A box, and we'll get to them at the end. Okay, so once again, a very big warm welcome to you all. And I am Amanda. I am a registered dietitian nutritionist. So first and foremost, I work with women every single day on how food can play a nourishing and empowering role in their lives. But I'm also a lactation counselor and an Ayurvedic yoga instructor. So a lot of the mindfulness work that we'll be talking about today is coming more from that training and that deeper understanding of mental health. All around women's health advocate over here, and then also founder of my own private practice, Roots to Leaves, that focuses on supporting women through all stages of life, fertility, pregnancy, postpartum, and beyond. So with that, I wanted to start off by doing a little bit of self-reflection. So as I'm sure busy women and new moms, we likely don't take enough time for ourselves or carve out any space to go inward. So since today's topic can be very personal, I wanted to get some of those more creative juices around introspection flowing. So I'll invite you to grab a piece of paper, or you can even just open up your notes app, or if you're on your laptop, a Word document, whatever is easiest. And we'll just start to consider some of these questions. And none of these will be shared unless you want to at the end, but these are just for you. So really try to be honest with yourself. So to start off, I'll invite you to just explore, what are 3 things that you love about yourself? Now, again, this can be something more physical, really the physical body, if you will. It can be something as small as a feature that you've always admired. And if love is a strong word, maybe something you just accept, something that you can embrace. If that's difficult as well, we can go into maybe a characteristic or a personality trait that you appreciate. So really trying to list at least 3. From there, I'll invite you to explore kind of how societal standards and messaging over time may have impacted your sense of self. So this can be around family food culture growing up, maybe around media messaging. And then lastly, I'll invite you to explore one thing that your body has done that has been amazing to you, or that is currently doing. So this can be growing a human, that is a really big deal. So that can be it, or it can be something that we take for granted every day, something like waking up and being able to breathe. So I'll give everyone maybe 2 to 3 minutes to just start to jot these things down. Maybe you can just sit with them as well, but just taking the time to reflect before we go into a broader discussion. And for anyone who is just joining, we're just doing a little bit of self-reflection work. So grab a pen and paper or notes app, or maybe just sit with it, but we're just going through these questions. And if you're having any difficulty coming up with answers, that's okay too. That's something to observe also and notice. We'll give it about 1 more minute. Okay. So we will slowly wrap this up. Again, you can always come back to these. If we have time at the end, we can explore them a little bit more. But all of this is an effort to really start to cultivate a bit more of that self-inquiry and a bit more of that positive self-talk that's really important during this time period. And we'll get more into that as well. Okay, so I wanted to start by a little quote that I love by Ashley Graham, who is a body positive model. And she said this after she gave birth to her child, that when I look at my new stretch marks and the changes that my body went through, it reminds me that as women, we're all superheroes. I'm always reminded that our bodies were built to do this. So this is really going to be a crux of a lot of the work that we do today, which is around how can we view our body? How can we view all that it has went through, all of the changes that it has gone through and will continue to go through with a form of empowerment, ease, and acceptance. So with that, let us dive a little bit deeper into the context. We're kind of getting a better understanding around why this topic is so important and laying the groundwork here. So we're going to start by understanding prenatal weight gain. Now, again, let's get on the same page here that the number is not really what matters and not what we're trying to focus on here at all. But rather we're discussing it in this context so we can really understand the changes that are taking place so we can have a more realistic expectation and understanding of the postpartum body. So the average woman is gaining upwards of 25, 35, 60 pounds, depending on carrying twins or not. But really only 6 to 8 in that context is going towards fat stores. Then the rest is either distributed to baby, the placenta, and then all over changes in the body. So an expanding uterus, breast tissue, body fluids, increase in blood volume. And this is significant because even outside of weight, the body is changing, right? The body is evolving, and all of it is in an effort to best create a home for your growing little one. But with that, this is incredibly energy intensive, right? Just like Ashley Graham said, we're essentially superheroes in this regard. And actually a recent study, I think it was in 2022, found that pregnant women operate at 2.2 times their usual metabolic rate. So it's basically, in their words, like running a 40-week marathon, right? So when we think about it like that, we understand that our body is under lots of pressures during this time. It's working really hard and going through drastic changes in pregnancy. So we want to start to accept this more superhero concept, right? To view these changes and embrace them with empowerment, especially in pregnancy. And that will make it easier in the postpartum period as well. Again, also related to realistic expectations. And so with that, I always like to pose the question that it took 9 months to grow a human. So why do we expect it to immediately bounce back after birth? And we'll talk more about bounce back culture. So again, with expectations and understanding what that may look like after birth, the average woman loses 10 to 14 pounds, and that's right away. That's with delivering baby, with placenta, with blood loss, fluid loss, and so on. But the remaining weight that was gained during pregnancy can come off gradually, or it can come off quickly. And that depends on so many factors, much of which is outside of our control. So some of it's, yes, related to how much weight was gained during pregnancy and breastfeeding, but also hormonal changes that are really taking place during this time period. Physical activity, sleep, right? That will have a lot of changes in the postpartum period, energy levels, and then potentially any thyroid conditions that are coming up, like postpartum thyroiditis or different mood changes and so on. So a lot of this is outside of our control. And yet we get this narrative that is completely within our control. So starting to understand the expectations there. And with that, the postpartum body is marked by much more than weight, right? We see changes in scars, in acne, in breast size, in cellulite. So there are all these other changes that can be taking place too. Now, none of this is to scare expecting moms out there. I know there are some of you on here too. So we are trying to just create realistic understandings and acceptance of the changes, and normalizing them as a key part of making this a safe space to discuss these maybe less comfortable sometimes or less normalized changes. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about bounce back culture. So bounce back culture is this idea that's really pushed forward mostly by the media that women are meant to kind of snap back into their pre-pregnancy bodies and behaviors, which is incredibly unrealistic, right? It's like asking us to erase the last 9 months. And so with that, it ignores the very drastic physiological changes that happen during pregnancy, labor, and postpartum, and this very real need for rest and recovery. So I'm pulling out a few headlines here and images and even postpartum controversies, if you will, that show the attention that the postpartum body gets in the media. So body surveillance and monitoring that women and moms have to face is constant. We see it with celebrity culture a ton, right? Both in unrealistic expectations that are posted online and in magazines, to pop culture that just tears apart women in the postpartum period, and commenting as if these authors have any authority on another's body and journey, and usually without any mention of what the body's actually gone through and what it is still emotionally and physically going through. So this celebrity culture and praise and criticism only add to the confusion of what a postpartum body is supposed to look like and how we're supposed to move through that season of life. So we see photos of celebrities postpartum that have returned to their pre-pregnancy weight, if you will, and they're both torn down for it and then also praised for it at the same time. Other celebrities share every intricate detail of their weight loss journey and their workout plans, again, putting this pressure on moms to change their body or to get it back to a certain state. Other celebs that don't return to their postpartum bodies and then post more normal photos, if you will, are viewed as then different and put on a pedestal in a different way. Either way, this excess attention on the postpartum body creates a dynamic where female and mothering bodies become a public forum. So again, especially when a body is already under stress and is trying to recover, we need to be shifting the narrative. And now all of this is also in light of other factors and pressures, especially in these last few years. So we know that COVID has set off a slew of mental health concerns, right? We've seen upticks in eating disorders and eating concerns and stress levels and anxiety and even postpartum depression. And all this is happening while we're also seeing headlines at the same time, again, commenting on celebrity weight loss and pushing diet culture through Ozempic and cleanses and whatnot. So all of this is to say that especially in the postpartum period, a time that should be about rest and recovery and replenishing, why do we allow the wounds or the pressures of society, if you will, to take away the worth of mom's battle scars and pregnancy journey and current body? And that's what we're really going to be diving into today. So with that, we're going to dive a bit deeper into postpartum body image and its impacts on both mental, emotional, and physical health. Okay, so to just get on the same page here, we're going to talk a little bit more about the postpartum time period, because even that in and of itself can be confusing. So above all else, whether we're talking about a couple weeks or months here, or maybe even longer than that, it's a time of rest and recovery. So again, the fewer demands that you can place on yourself. So that includes the pressures of society, but also pressures on the physical body and appearance. The better, right? Your body and your baby need you to rest and care for yourself. Now, from a more medical perspective, there are about 3 stages of postpartum, if you will, and each stage is marked by different needs. So the first is more this like acute phase of 6 to 12 hours after birth. And this is when you're still in the hospital. It's when that immediate weight loss takes place that we talked about. And it's when it's like the most relevant to doctors, if you will, where we're having a lot of body surveillance at this time. And if you've not engaged in maybe conversations like these before, then you may be a little bit shocked, maybe that's, or maybe a little bit taken aback by the fact that you may still look pregnant even after birth. Again, this expectation that we're meant to jump right back, that's not representing reality. So again, without realistic expectations, this can set us up for more body image dissatisfaction. Then that second stage is between 2 and 6 weeks. So this is when we start to see swelling starting to go down, the pelvis floor contracting, but metabolism also changes during this time. Emotions start to change. We see potential mood fluctuations, a time of heightened emotions. And we also begin to feel excess pressures around weight loss, right? Even at the 6-week postpartum checkup, that messaging may be further reinforced, especially if we're having a doctor talking about exercise with us. So all this is to say that this is a time that's also marked by a lot of changes, right? Throw in breastfeeding, throw in if we have to go back to work as well. There's a lot going on, and yet the emphasis is still not placed on rest and recovery. Then we have 6 weeks to 6 months post-birth. So again, the pressures of society can start to grow here. And this is when we're just starting to see, again, the body finding its new baseline. So again, not returning to baseline, but finding its new baseline, right? And this is amidst new pressures like childcare or going back to work, or maybe just changes in general time and energy resources and so on. And then there's this like then what phase, if you will, which is the phase for women after that 6-month mark, who are still going through a massive transition, right? It's not like we hit the 6-month mark and magically everything is quote unquote back. We are often still trying to find a baseline that feels comfortable for us. We're still trying to embrace this new body, and now oftentimes without much support from the medical system, and with a whole load of expectations around bounce back culture. So as we're settling into your new body and your new life and your new normal, we really need to start to question some of these inner narratives that are coming up. So all of these stages of postpartum recovery are important, and they're a new season of life that really is marked by changes and transitions to the physical and the emotional body. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the messaging that we receive. So the first one that I want to talk about is this idea that a body at any stage, but especially in the postpartum period, is a project or something to be fixed, if you will. A body is a body, right? It's not the latest DIY project. And especially when we're recovering in that postpartum period, we shouldn't be placing any excess stress on the body through diets or restrictions or workout plans in an effort to change. Women gain weight, women lose weight. We are constantly evolving, right? It doesn't make us less than or less worthy than at any other point in our life. And it's funny because I feel like, generally speaking, there's this understanding that we don't expect our mind or emotions to be static, right? We understand that yesterday you may have felt sad and today we're feeling happy, and we accept that the mind and mood fluctuate. But for some reason, society expects the same of the body always. And if it's not the same, then it expects it to go back to how it was, ignoring the very real fluctuations that take place, especially after a major life event like giving birth, like growing a child, and like breastfeeding and in the postpartum period. Now, it also creates a narrative around justified weight gain. And this goes into the pregnancy versus postpartum body and the impact that it has on esteem. So in one study, a woman reported feeling like their bodies changing during pregnancy was almost validated, right? Because it was obvious, if you will, that they were expecting a child. And we see women in the pregnancy stage being described as glowing and growing and beautiful. However, once postpartum hits, that narrative very quickly changes, right? That justification around weight is taken away. And it can really lead to questions of, why do I look the way I look? And that can start to impact our sense of self-worth. Now, even for women who lose weight quickly, right? The shapes and the size of parts of the body may be different and may take time to recover. So whether that is stretch marks or looser skin. Now, these things evolve over time, and some may be here to stay and some may fade with time. But either way, we want to start to push back on society's messaging that the postpartum body is not enough as it is. And, or if we're not pregnant, we have to get our body back, right? Because our body never left. It's always been here. It's just that it's different. So with that, just generally speaking, we also face a slew of other pressures outside of bounce back culture, right? We live in a time and in a society that absolutely celebrates thinness and perpetuates diet culture, whether that's through crash diets or the newest detox or cleanse or whatever it may be, on an effort to try and change the body or to fix the body. We even see kind of turning the postpartum body, if you will, or the mother body into a commodity, right, with mom jeans, which are essentially just high-waisted pants that push in the stomach more. So it's literally being used as a way to continue to perpetuate that we are not meant to look the way that we look. And I also just like to add in that we see such a discrepancy here around the harshness of the female body with the celebration of dad bods, for example, where we really don't see that among women, right? It's just this overarching criticism of what is a realistic mothering body. So now that we have all of this messaging and we understand this a bit more, let's go a little bit deeper into why it really matters. Because again, the impacts of body image in the postpartum period are more than just related to esteem. They really have emotional, deep emotional and physical impacts as well. So we know that women with lower postpartum body satisfaction are actually more at risk for increased mental health concerns, postpartum mood disorders, eating disorders over time and eating abnormalities, lower breastfeeding efficacy, and actually greater weight. And again, that's not that the weight is the focus here, but more so just to highlight the fact that body image plays a role in our physical body as well. So with that, studies have also shown, which I find really interesting, that low body image is not necessarily dependent on body weight as well, right? And so it goes to show that women of all sizes, of all walks of life, can face this. So highlighting that weight loss is really not the key here, but rather cultivating a positive body image that is. a few more points on this that I think are really important around how cultivating body image or what body image dissatisfaction can start to do on the physical and the emotional. So we know that this excessive focus on food restriction intake, so dieting, if you will, and a lack of control around eating, which is often coupled with dieting, is associated with a more negative self-perception. So it creates this cycle, if you will, of dieting and then not feeling good, and then dieting and not feeling good. And so we want to understand how we can break that cycle. And that's what we're going to be getting more into, is talking about the tools we can start to bring in. We also know that body dissatisfaction may worsen through the postpartum period. This is why I was going through those stages earlier of the postpartum period and how the needs change, the pressures change, and so on. But also comments from health professionals that reinforce the control that we should have, right? So being aware of that when walking into health professionals, whether it's doctor's appointments or working with a dietitian or whoever it may be as well, that a lot of the messaging that we receive can also reinforce, unfortunately, some of these pressures. And then I also just want to add that there is a positive association between body image dissatisfaction and postpartum depression. Again, showing how important it is really to start to cultivate this inner positive voice and self-talk, and knowing how we can honor our body at any stage of life. And in this study, actually, this was largely dependent on third trimester body image. This goes to show again that it's not that we give birth and we're in the postpartum period and the work starts now. This is something we should be cultivating even during pregnancy. So for those that are expecting in this meeting, this is kind of your call to action here as well. Okay, so a few notes here now on the impacts of dieting in the postpartum period. So with bounce back culture, with a lot of these headlines that are put out there, right, we see these quick fixes, the 7 tips to get back to your postpartum body, that are often just pushing really restrictive diets and intensive workout plans. And the issue with this is that it can actually have impacts again on mental and physical health. So we know that dieting and mental health really go hand in hand. Now, a big part of this is related to the esteem that we talked about in the previous slides, but also that dieting reduces the amount of food that we are intaking, right? That's how it works. But with that, it reduces our nutrients and vitamins that we receive as well. We simply have less access to food when we are trying to restrict food. And with that, we then know that low minerals, low B vitamins, which are really commonly found in carbohydrates, one of the first foods to get cut out of a diet, low vitamin D, low fatty acid intake, all of these things have actually been linked to postpartum depression and postpartum mood disorders. So again, dieting here is not the answer, especially not in this postpartum period. Dieting also affects postpartum recovery. We need protein for wound healing, right? Whether you had a C-section or episiotomy, we need to have adequate protein levels and adequate nourishment to actually repair tissue. So again, dieting is not appropriate here either. Lower energy levels. You want to have all the energy that you can have in the postpartum period, right? We're not trying to make it harder on ourselves. And since food is literally nourishment, it literally gives us energy. That's what its primary purpose is. When we take it away, when we restrict it, when we slash calories, we are giving ourselves less fuel to go off of. Again, not appropriate in a time of rest and recovery. And then finally, if you are breastfeeding, we know that diet quality also plays a big role in breast milk quality. We know that dieting, restricting calories, restricting our access to different vitamins, minerals, and so on can also have an impact. Okay, so all of this to say is that a more positive body image in the postpartum period has been associated with better breastfeeding outcomes and length, improved mental health, lower depression and anxiety, greater self-esteem, improved relationship with food, and overall confidence. So again, trying to shift the narrative to take it off of weight, off of the physical, and really move it much more towards our emotional connection with self, our positive body image, and using that to kind of lead the way. So that is what we're going to be diving into now for the remainder of this meeting, is how can we start to cultivate a positive body image and health in the postpartum period. Now we're going to walk through a whole bunch of tools. So this is not to add on to your to-do list in the postpartum period. This is not to make things more complicated or feel like you have to tackle all of it. Rather, it is there so we can start to see what resonates, right? Starting to open up maybe a dialogue around some of these topics. If something resonates with you, maybe write them down, explore them further. So it's all about trying to reinforce ideas, even maybe ones that you've heard of before. Okay. So we're starting with having realistic expectations during pregnancy. So we already talked a little bit about this, but again, really trying to release the timeline. So already, if you are currently expecting to start to now release that 6-week mark that tends to be put out there so much, understanding that postpartum is a time of rest and rejuvenation and replenishing, right? And taking care of your little one. That should be first and foremost. And then also just starting to accept the fact that the body will change. It's a new season of life, right? So rather than focusing on where it was before, trying to focus on where it is now, right? And understanding that these changes can be celebrated, and we'll talk more about it. Number 2 is confronting societal expectations. So we've already talked about a lot of that in today's webinar, and I'll invite you to continue those conversations, especially when we feel that certain negative self-talk is coming in, right? So if we are noticing that the voice in our head is criticizing the way that we look, or telling us that we should lose X, Y, and Z amount of weight, or shouldn't have these marks on our body, can we start to confront the societal expectations there? Can we start to ask, well, why do I feel like I'm supposed to look a certain way? Why do I feel like my body should look X, Y, and Z sort of way? And with that, maybe really start to notice where that messaging is coming from and how can we push back on it. 3 is from there starting to create a gap between you and your thoughts. And this can be difficult to do, but I think it's really important, which is this idea of your thoughts are not your reality, right? Thoughts are just thoughts. They're constantly fluctuating, like we said. And so when we notice thoughts starting to come up that are commenting on our body, that are criticizing the way we look, can we start to, again, question it? Is there truth to this, actual truth? Is there any counter evidence to this? Is there a societal messaging that I've received that's influencing this? Is there something else that's gone on today that is leading to me feeling this way, right? Is there another emotion that's underlying it? So if maybe the thought is around, I should be 5 pounds lighter, or I shouldn't have these stretch marks. Can we start to ask ourselves, okay, well, what am I feeling like when I think that? Is it because I feel like I have a loss of control right now in this postpartum period with all these changes going on? Is it because I'm feeling like I miss or mourning my previous body that I was in? So again, just starting to observe and notice the feelings that are attached to it, rather than allowing the mind to take over with the thoughts. And then from that, can we be our own compassionate voice? This is something I do with my clients all the time, and I think it's incredibly important, which is when you have that negative self-talk coming in, can we start to ask ourselves, would I say that to a loved one? Would I say that to my mom? Would I say that to my sister, a friend? Would I say that to my child, my daughter or my son? If they came to me in 10 years and they had some of these concerns coming up, would I answer? Or what would I say to them? They were coming to me with the same thoughts that are going on in my head. And if you wouldn't say that to a loved one, why are we okay saying it to ourselves, right? Because we are with ourselves for our entire lives. We are the one person that is never going to leave us. And so why do we accept speaking to ourselves with aggression, right? We should be our own best friend in that way. And so how can we start to redirect that inner narrative to really be focused on love and compassion? So I find that tool to be really powerful to start to ask, would I say this to someone else that I love? And if someone I love came to me saying this, how would I respond? And can you bring that voice into yourself as well? Okay. Reframing the body. So this one I also find really important, which is how can we start to honor our flaws, or view these different changes that have come up during pregnancy and postpartum, and start to view them through a form of empowerment, or just through even a slightly different lens, right? So with stretch marks, for example, instead of viewing them as these things that we want to go away or erase, can we instead view them as a symbolism of the journey that our body went through to bring us here, right? If we're noticing that breast size has changed, or that the shape of our breasts have changed, rather than trying to hold on to what they looked like before, can we catch that inner voice? And can we instead say to ourselves, well, that's what provided nourishment to my child, right? If breastfeeding wasn't in your journey and maybe it's just weight changes, the same sort of voice can go there. Similarly, instead of focusing on what the body looks like, can we start to focus on what it does, right? So if we're noticing that the fixation in our head is maybe around having larger arms than what we had before, something that we don't like about ourselves, instead of focusing on what they look like, can we instead offer a bit of appreciation of my arms are strong so I can hold my child day in and day out. My arms are strong so I can move through the day and carry things that I'm constantly probably picking up all over the place. So again, starting to reframe the body and what it can do. Embrace body neutrality and respect. This one I also find really important, because the word love can seem a little bit daunting sometimes, of love your body, right? And so it doesn't have to be this overarching, just absolute appreciation for the self right off the bat. That takes time to cultivate. In the beginning, especially if you're new to this journey, especially if you had a difficult time in the beginning of this meeting with the reflections on naming a few things you love about yourself, you had a hard time answering that question. Then I'll invite you to try and bring in body neutrality, right? It doesn't have to have value. Can we just become more neutral about it? And with that, can we respect the body, right? And I think that that's a really key part of the postpartum period in general, is how can we respect the body? If the body is hungry, how can we respect that messaging? Well, we can feed it, right? So learning how we can respect ourselves, how and maybe provide neutrality to it, rather than just focusing on the self-love or affirmations if that feels like it's more difficult. Redefining wellness. This one I think is so important for all women across the board. We live in a time that equates wellness with thinness, with weight loss, with a perfect way of eating, which there is no such thing as. So instead, can we really start to explore within ourselves what wellness means to us, right? What does it actually mean to feel good? When have we felt good before? And what state were we in? Likely it had very little to do with how we looked and more to do with the emotion that we were in, the activity we were in, the people we were around, maybe the environment we were in. So how can we cultivate those feelings and put the emphasis on those feelings? Maybe it's asking yourself, what does balance mean to me? What does that look like, right? What does health mean to me? So again, this can be a journal prompt. This can be something you carry around with you, reflect on a little bit more, but trying to redefine some of the messaging that we've been told throughout our lives. Consider meditation. So this one's a bit more of a specific tool, but meditation has actually really been shown to have really positive mental health outcomes and actually been shown to improve body image satisfaction, specifically in the postpartum period. They've done a few studies on this now, and I think it was about 3 weeks of consistent meditation practice has been shown to help support body image in that postpartum period. So meditation is often doing a lot of what we talked about in the previous slides. A lot of it is around creating a gap between you and your thoughts, bringing in a compassionate voice, being the observer of your mind. So that's where this can be really helpful. Again, if you're new to meditation, there are amazing apps that are available now, like the Calm app or Headspace. You can go online and literally just type in guided meditation, do that for even 5 minutes a day. Right? We again started off this meeting today by saying how we don't even take 5 minutes to do some self-reflection. This doesn't have to be a big commitment. You can start off small and give 2, 5, maybe working up to 10 minutes a day of just calming the mind, checking in with the self. Okay, practicing intuitive eating. So this is a really big topic. We're not going to tackle every single point here, but I do think it is important to mention. So intuitive eating is a framework for our relationship with food and how we can move about nutrition in a way that really takes into account this rejection of diet mentality, if you will. And it can be really important in that postpartum period too. So it has about 10 principles. I've listed them out here for you. We're not going to go into every single one, but the few that I really do want to highlight is this idea of honoring hunger. Again, that goes back to the idea of self-respect, right? Which is, as women, I think we often view hunger as something to push down or push away. There's so much misinformation around this, to drink water if we're feeling hungry because we might just be thirsty, or to brush your teeth and see if you're still hungry at that point. So this is saying, let's just completely ditch that mentality. And if we're hungry, let's eat, right? Our body is telling us that we are hungry. How can we respect this cue? Well, we have to provide it with nourishment so we are fueling ourselves. That's one of the principles here that I really want to point out, especially postpartum, where our diet and our calorie needs and nutrient needs are so heightened. Similarly, when we start to challenge the food police, so can we take the morality out of food? And this is not to say that we are ignoring all nutrition pillars, but rather questioning, well, what value does self-judgment around my food choices serve me, right? So starting to question the food police's idea of clean eating, of good food, of bad food, and rather viewing food for what it is, which is nourishment, which is fuel. We'll talk more about that too. And then I think the last one that I want to point out here that I think is important is similar to respecting the body and honoring your hunger, is feeling your fullness, right? So that's the satisfaction factor of being able to eat slowly, of satisfying your hunger and also knowing when to stop. And a big part of that is also comes from being able to eat when we're hungry. Otherwise, we're creating this battle of pushing off hunger, trying to keep it away, and then overdoing it later because we're ravenous. So if intuitive eating is something that you feel is resonating with you, I highly recommend looking more deeply into it. It's something that has a lot of research behind it now and has really been shown to not only support physical health outcomes down the line, but mental health outcomes as well. Okay, focusing on abundance over restriction. So these are going to be a bit more food-based, if you will, and some ways to go about nutrition and nourishment during the postpartum period. And this one I would say is my absolute favorite. I will work on this with all of my clients across the board, but especially in that postpartum period when there's all these pressures to try and change the body, is instead of asking ourselves, what should I remove or what can I restrict? How can we instead focus on what can I add? So it doesn't matter what is on our plate. How can we try and view this plate from an abundance mindset? So if there's a food that we deem as less healthy, if you will, instead of thinking, oh, I have to get rid of this, or I shouldn't be eating this, or again, having that more restriction around the meal, how can we instead shift the narrative to ask ourselves, well, can I add in an extra serving of vegetables here? Or can I bring in maybe some healthy fats from avocados or nuts or whatever it may be? So again, reminding ourselves that in this postpartum period, it's a time of repletion and a time of recovery. And so abundance should be at the forefront of our relationship with food. Also, how can we start to look at food as nourishment, right? So not looking at it as a means to an end, not looking at it as a way to control the body or to reach X, Y, and Z physical attribute that we're going for, but instead, how can we view it as a form of energy, right? If we are having a really busy day and we're running around after our little ones and we're caring for our other newborn, whatever it is that is on our plate, can we just view it as the energy that we need to get through that day, right? So shifting the focus there. Can we view it as a form of just joy? Can we enjoy and find food pleasurable again, right? So again, starting to shift the emphasis we put on food. Using food as a form of self-respect, I think also really important. This is where that more gentle nutrition comes in as well from intuitive eating. So how can we start to bring in foods that we know are nourishing to us? Again, not focusing on restricting other things, but instead just focusing on the nourishing foods to bring in. And with that comes into this last point that I think is really important, which is, can we start to notice what feels good in our body? So almost doing like a mental check with ourselves when we are eating a meal and just noticing what foods make us feel more energized, right? What foods make us feel calmer? What foods kind of make us feel a little bit happier? And odds are, if we start to do these self-checks around the foods that we're eating, we'll start to notice that it tends to be whole foods in general that make us feel physically better, right? Especially over those more processed foods. Now, it's not to say those processed foods can't ever come in. That's not at all what I'm preaching here, but rather that if we, again, start to pay attention to how we feel after we have, a stew with some cooked vegetables in it and legumes, how that feels energetically to us, emotionally to us, and so on. Then again, from an even more physical perspective, how do we feel when we have, let's say, a big bowl of like raw salad in the postpartum period versus a warm stew? Odds are your body will feel better after the stew. This is the more cooked foods, if you will, are easier to digest, easier on digestion, reducing constipation, and so on. So again, almost doing that mental check of not judging it, but just noticing, how do I feel after I eat this meal, right? What is it feeling like in my body? Similarly, carbohydrates, we know, and I always like to again emphasize this because it's the one that tends to get pushed out the fastest, is really important for mood during this time. So how do you feel when you have a piece of chocolate? Oftentimes we feel a little bit happy, right? How do we feel after we have sweet potatoes? We likely have more energy down the line. We often feel like a little bit of a burst of energy. So these things are actually increasing our dopamine, our serotonin, and so on. And so with that, once we start to notice this, becoming the observer of our relationship with foods and how they impact our body, how can we bring in more foods that make us feel good in our body? A couple more suggestions here. This one does depend more on access and means, but if it is available to you, I do recommend going shopping, right? Clothing is meant to fit us and our current body, not the other way around. So again, if you have access to do so, I recommend doing a little bit of like a postpartum closet check. And if you're noticing that you're holding on to that pair of jeans or a dress from before you were pregnant and are hoping to fit into one day and it's causing you stress and you know it's in the back of your closet, can you get rid of it? Can you donate it? Can you give it to another loved one? And instead, can you buy a new outfit, or can you get access to a new outfit that will make you feel more comfortable and more confident in your current body? Because that's the one we're trying to care for. Intuitive movement. So movement, we know, can also really support mental health and physical health, but not to a point where it is causing excess stress on the body, right? Again, not the goal here. So not saying to go and run a marathon or start going to various boot camp or whatever it may be that's going to be really energy intensive, but rather starting to notice what types of movement feel good in our body, right? Maybe it's going for a walk outside with your little one in a stroller, getting sun on your skin. How does that feel to move your body gently in that way? Maybe it's doing a couple stretches before the evening, but starting to, again, restore your relationship with movement. Detox from Instagram and social media is a really big one, especially if you find that you are someone that is turning to social media as a way to fill space and a way that leaves you feeling depleted, or leaves you feeling like you're comparing. Again, it doesn't have to be forever, but maybe even taking a little bit of a hiatus can go a long way. And oftentimes you get back a lot more time too, right? Whether that's for reading, for more self-nourishing activities, for time with your family or support system, whatever it may be. If you are going to stay on social media, I do recommend going through and unfollowing specific accounts that you know are upsetting to you or breeding comparison or whatever it may be. And I've listed 2 different Instagram accounts here that are more body positive mothers. I think that Hatch actually has an entire article written on different body positive postpartum or pregnant women. So I recommend going to check that out as well. Get support. Really big in this time period too. And that can come in all different kinds of forms, right? But if you feel like you're really struggling with your body image, with your relationship with food, to seek help from a therapist, to seek help from a registered dietitian, or any safe person as well, right? It's not going to take the place of a qualified professional, but also having that support system and community is really important, especially in the postpartum period. And it can even be as important as asking someone if they can help cook meals for you during that postpartum time period, right? Or drop food off. So all these different ways that support can come in. And then above all else, remembering that if you do nothing else in the postpartum period, it is about resting, it is about recovering, it is about recharging, it is about spending time with your little one. So whatever decisions that you are making around your body from a nourishment perspective, from a physical perspective, from an esteem perspective, can they be rooted in this principle of rest, recovery, and recharging? So I will also just add that if you want to go shopping, we're at Hatch here. So that's a good place to start as well. Okay, so kind of putting it all together a little bit here now with just some guiding principles around how we can start to create a healthful postpartum recovery. So let's start with just nourishing the body, right? The more physical body. So we talked about focusing on abundance. Again, really important. Always thinking, what can I add to my plate? What can I add to this meal that's going to be supportive of my health goals, supportive of my body, supportive of my mind? From there, can we eat a nutrient-dense diet that's filled with real whole foods? When in doubt, say that's the nutrition pillar to always go back to. Can we use food as a way to respect the body? So we talked about this with honoring hunger, with supporting fullness, with recognizing fullness. Also with just eating frequent meals, right? Eating every 3 to 4 hours in a way that's going to give us energy throughout the day. And then trying intuitive eating. That's something that also resonated with you. We're looking more into it in the different principles there. Nourishing postpartum body image, right? So a big chunk of this meeting as well. So I really do recommend practicing mindfulness with any of the suggestions that we said in the previous slide. So that can be meditation, that can be journaling prompts and self-reflection, that can be trying to remind yourself to catch the inner voice and offer a little bit of a gap there to be the observer, to bring in that compassionate voice, to ask yourself if you would say this to a friend or a loved one. Try to go shopping if that's accessible to you, to purchase new clothing, or maybe ask a friend or someone else in your family if they have hand-me-downs they can give that make you feel more comfortable. Consider quitting the social media comparison game or just social media in general, taking a break for a little while, focusing on your little one, allowing yourself to be cared for and receiving support. Again, as women, we feel like we have to do it all, right? We feel this at all different stages of life, but especially in motherhood. So if you are able to and you have someone you can turn to, can we reach out for support? And with that, asking for help as well. Okay, and then above all else, again, the postpartum period is marked by recovery and a need to slow down, to replete, to replenish, and to care for yourself and your little one. So if anything that you are consuming through the media or any messaging that is sticking with you is counterproductive to these pillars, then it likely is not going to serve you and your body and your mind during this time. That includes dieting, which can be very stressful on the body. That includes trying to feel like there's a timeline you have to meet or reaching unrealistic expectations. So instead, how can we continue to work with our mind? How can we continue to bring in food in a way that is really going to help support the recovery period? We're going to go a little bit into some final reflections. So you can either turn back to that same piece of paper that you had before or the notes app that you opened up. And we're just going to dive a little bit deeper into a few questions here. You can also return back to your previous questions. And after we've gone through this, maybe add to them, reflect on them a little bit more. Okay, so number one, it's broad, but I do think it's important, especially if you are expecting and can start to maybe readjust your expectations during this time period. So try to ask yourself, how will I rest, recover, and or receive support postpartum? What do these words mean to me? What do they look like? That would be number one. Number two, is there 1 to 3 strategies that we discussed today that you feel resonated with you the most? And I do think it's important to write it down so that you feel like it's anchored and it sticks with you. So again, it can be something that wasn't touched on today, or it can be, 10 of the things that we chatted about, but really write them down so you can remember what they are and turn back to them when needed. And then 3, what role modeling do you want to set for your child around food and body image? This is one that I know that as women, we think about a lot, we explore a lot. But if we have that in mind, how can we start with us right now, right? Because that's how we can really put forward that messaging. So I'll give us maybe 3 minutes or so to just dive into these questions, and then we'll open up a bit more for discussion. We'll give it about 1 more minute. Okay. So I hope that even taking this time to reflect allows you to start to cultivate that connection with self and inner voice a little bit more, especially on a topic that I feel like does not get discussed nearly enough as women, especially in the pregnancy and postpartum space. So whether you wrote it down on a piece of paper or if it's on your phone, it's saved. A piece of paper, I recommend putting it somewhere that you can turn back to, especially during times or days where you feel like you need that extra reminder or support. So with that, I'm going to open it up for discussion, questions, and answers. I know there's a question in the question box. I'm going to get to that first. But from there, if anyone wants to share anything that's either come up, again, we're trying to make this as collaborative and safe of a space as possible. So whether it's something you want to share from the reflections, feelings that came up during this meeting, or if you have questions, this will be the time. So I'm going to start with Amanda's question in the question box. Read it out loud here. Part of the expectation to me is about the number of pounds you gain. Even starting off, it mentions 25 to 35 pounds. And if you start at 120 versus 150 and are 5'2" versus 5'8", how would that affect that? Okay. Completely understand the question. And I think it's a really tricky topic. And I think it also depends on what type of healthcare provider you are working with. Now, from my lens and as a more weight neutral dietitian, the idea of these pregnancy weight gain parameters, if you will, are based off of something called BMI or body mass index, which is a calculation that is based on kind of the average weight and height comparatively for different genders. Now, the issue with this is that BMI is a highly biased and flawed tool, right? It was created by a white man for specifically only white European men, and it's actually never really been validated on women. But despite that, that is the body measure that we use in healthcare. And as a result, it is what determines those pre-pregnancy weight gain recommendations. So for where I'm standing, I believe that they are not usually indicative, one, of any sort of state of health, and two, are not representative of the female body. Women and men are quite different physiologically. We have different fat stores, different needs, and so on. So to answer your question a bit more clearly, it's not that there is a set amount of pounds that you have to weigh to be in good health during pregnancy, and as a result, lose postpartum. What matters much more is how you are nourishing yourself. And I'm a big believer that if we are nourishing ourselves fully, and that's more of a diet-based meeting, which we will be having in the future, I believe, and I think there's another one that Hatch is doing in a couple of weeks. But if we are nourishing, if we're following a lot of the pillars we talked about today, using food as a form of self-respect, honoring our hunger and fullness, trying to choose whole foods, noticing how foods make us feel, then our weight will often find the baseline that it needs that is most supportive of our health at any given time. So while I know that it can feel frustrating, if you will, because we live in a society that hyper focuses on numbers, to try and ditch the scale, to try and ditch the numbers there, and instead put more of an emphasis on the relationship with food and nourishment. So Amanda, let me know if that answers your question or if you have a follow-up question to that. Okay. How do you recommend dealing with gestational diabetes in pregnancy and how that impacts body image and our relationship with food? Yes, also a great question. So again, hope to do a bit more of a deeper dive into gestational diabetes. But if we are, this webinar is speaking more about postpartum, but if there were a pregnancy medical condition like gestational diabetes, like preeclampsia, where we have to be monitoring our relationship with food more, and it is less on intuitive eating, right? There are more factors that are at play, more of a medical nutrition therapy approach that needs to be put in. Postpartum, you likely will have some more considerations as well. That being said, most of those conditions do fade away once we're in that postpartum period. That being said, I do think that working with a dietitian, especially if you found that having those restrictions or that monitoring, which happens so much in pregnancy, but especially if you have a more medical condition, has impacted your relationship with food, that's where I recommend working with a dietitian and or a health professional that is focused on relationships with food and disordered eating. Anyone? Oh, this one's open to anyone. So I love this question, Samantha. Anyone have any advice around boundary setting? Yes, around body talk, specifically with family. My husband's grandmother always says something. She's super sweet. Okay. And I don't know that she understands the impact of what she says, but her greeting to me was, "Hey, mama." Yes. So this is open. So if anyone else wants to jump in here, would appreciate other voices. But yeah, Samantha, this can be a really tough one. And I think especially when we're talking about different generations, right, and different cultures, fatness in other generations was viewed as beautiful, as abundant. We are now living a time where that pendulum has really swung, and we are now celebrating thinness. And so I think one part of it is also being aware, not saying that we have to accept it, but being aware of these differences and what people's intentions are going into it. And two, with boundary setting, I think that it always will be uncomfortable. Setting boundaries is uncomfortable, right? We are stepping outside of our comfort zone, and we are then saying something that is going to make other people uncomfortable, and as a result, usually uncomfortable for ourselves as well. But I always find the simpler and the clearer, especially around body comments and body surveillance, is the better. So it can be as simple as saying, I don't really want to talk about my body, or in my house or wherever I am, that's not up for debate right now. That's not up for public conversation. I appreciate your note. I appreciate where it's coming from, but I don't want to talk about that. And just being very, very clear. Again, open to other comments here, other thoughts. I know that the family dynamic can be one that can bring up a lot of different emotions and relationships. Amanda, I like your idea of putting up the middle finger. Anyone else want to add to that before I go on to the next question? Trying to be cognizant of time as well. Okay. Any more thoughts on specific nourishing foods, kinds of foods that can help with C-section recovery? Yeah, great question. And our breastfeeding. Sorry, this is the wrong over to ask. No problem. Yeah, so this meeting ended up being much more about body image and relationship to self and food in that way. That being said, hoping to do another meeting with Hatch in the future about these more specific types of nourishment for these different stages of life and conditions. I also, again, I think it's sometime in July that Hatch is doing a nutrition webinar for anyone who's interested from, I think it's second semester through the fourth trimester. So maybe go check that out on their community hub as well. That being said, kind of a bit more of like a laundry list, if you will. But when it comes to nourishing foods, especially after C-section recovery, it's going to be focused on wound healing. It's going to be focused on replenishment. So again, a lot of what we talked about in this webinar too, of how can we choose foods that are going to be nutrient dense, right? That are going to be abundant, that are going to be in their whole food form. So a lot of that comes down to high quality protein sources. That can be anything from eggs, it can be wild fatty fish that's also going to help lower inflammation, salmon, sardines, anchovies, bivalves like clams, mussels, and so on. Really any animal protein. I know this is difficult if you're a vegan or vegetarian, and that's a whole other topic as well. But animal protein during this time, and well-cooked animal protein, is really, really nourishing. Organ meat, which also can be quite difficult and not palatable to many if you have not consumed organ meat before, like liver, but it's essentially like a nature's multivitamin, if you will. It's extremely high, and a lot of the vitamins that we lose or get depleted of coming into the postpartum period and during pregnancy. Eating iron-rich foods, especially after C-section, to help replenish iron from blood loss. So those dark leafy greens, again, a lot of the animal protein too. Breastfeeding. So a lot of what we talked about today, also really important. Our breastfeeding calorie, vitamin, and mineral needs are actually higher than they were in pregnancy. So if you're breastfeeding, this is an even more demanding time on your body in some ways than when you were pregnant for those full 9 months. So with that, again, not trying to go into any sort of dieting or weight loss approach, and really focusing on abundance, right? Continuing to ask, what can I add to my plate? And again, from my perspective, as long as we are choosing whole foods here, whether that is through whole grains, quinoa, farro, rice, oats, so on, through starchy vegetables, the potatoes, the squash, through high quality protein and animal protein, through legumes, any types of fruits, vegetables, all of those foods are going to be supportive to a postpartum body, a breastfeeding body, C-section recovery, and so on. I know that that's probably not as satisfying as a specific answer, but it really is the truth from a nutrition perspective. There's no kind of quick fix magic bullet with these things. I'll also just add that bone broth as well. Really ancient healing food that has been used in many different cultures, specifically in Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine, as a way to support wound healing and support the postpartum body. So that's a specific food to bring into. What if part of your positive body image is that you're strong and fit and feel good when exercise? I do have a child to learn that with the restrictions and need for recovery. Yeah, Totally. And I think that that's a really great question as well. Now, everyone's relationship to movement is different, and everyone's baseline around movement is different. So with that, I like to say that if you were not maybe someone who was really into movement prior to pregnancy, then we don't necessarily recommend that you start training for a marathon during pregnancy or in that postpartum period. If you were someone that had a more active or higher active baseline prior, then your needs are different, right? So this really is much more individual. Now, that being said, I love that a part of your positive body image and sense of self is rooted in strong and fit. Those are words that I wish more women would embrace and celebrate a lot more. So with that, in terms of exercise in pregnant and postpartum period, especially after a C-section, it's important to speak with your doctor. That's where wound recovery and healing is really important. And that's why I think I mentioned it in a couple of slides back. It's usually around that 6-week mark that women tend to be cleared for postpartum movement and more rigorous exercise. C-section tends to be a little bit longer. So with that, and again, this is not the meeting that's going to go a deep dive into this topic, but if you want to start bringing in more gentle types of movement like yoga, which is a really wonderful way to stretch the body, to connect with the body, to connect with the breath. So again, it's almost like tying in that more body image, mental health piece that we talked about today with the movement that's also important for physical health. That would be something I'd start to look into. I also recommend, especially with C-section or any more physical changes that are happening in the postpartum period that you feel like is hindering your ability to move forward in your workout regimen, working with a physical therapist that specializes in the postpartum period. There are quite a few great ones out there, and now quite a few that are working virtually. I will reach out to the hosts of Hatch and see if it's possible to do a follow-up email, and if I can offer you guys some resources for some of these questions as well. Okay, any other questions? I know we're a little bit over on time. Okay, so with that, I do want to end with one of my favorite quotes for women of all different stages of life, which is by Maya Angelou: "When women take care of their health, they become their own best friend." So really, again, it goes back to the idea that we are with ourselves for the rest of our lives. We are there to care for ourselves. And the more that we can continue to cultivate this relationship with self, our respective self, of our body, of our mind, the more it will go and bring us towards a place of self-love. So I will end there. I have sources here on some of the studies that were mentioned. And if you would like to stay in touch, and check out the Instagram, go to my website, feel free to email me if you want to talk further. Yes, don't be a stranger, please reach out. And it was lovely to chat with you all. And thank you for showing up today. I know this is a difficult topic to take on, so I appreciate your time and presence. Okay. Bye, everyone.